So it looks like the hearing will be this week. What specifically do you plan on asking Brett Kavanaugh?
There are a lot of issues around Brett that involving what was happening in high school, et cetera. But even before all of this happened, he had credibility issues in his testimony, 3 days of testimony. He's very outcome-driven in terms of how he views cases before him. And so I had issues with his credibility and how he went about things way before this even happened.
But you're not going to talk to him about policy at this hearing. This hearing is about specifically the allegations.
I would be wanting to hear what kind of environment it was in high school. Apparently there was a lot of drinking and partying going on. This is why we need an investigation. We need an independent investigation that lays all of that out for us so that there's at least some chance of some outside entity like the FBI doing an investigation. This is totally untoward because remember, during the Anita Hill days, there was an investigation, perfunctory as that was, but Dr. Ford is not even afforded that. Meanwhile, she's coming forward and very bravely saying, I will tell my story. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that she can tell her story free of intimidation, fear, and the kind of threats that she's already getting for even coming forward with it.
The Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote a piece about the presumption of guilt, they say. They quoted you directly to argue that a core tenet of American law is not being applied to Kavanaugh. They write, quote, the democratic standard for sexual assault allegations is they should be accepted as true merely for having been made. The accuser is assumed to be telling the truth because the accuser is a woman. The burden is on Mr. Kavanaugh to prove his innocence. This turns American justice and due process upside down. What's your response?
If the Wall Street Journal really cares about due process, I'd say that they should care that there is no independent investigation of these allegations. I think that this kind of attitude is what makes it really difficult for victims and survivors of these kinds of traumatic events to even come forward. You know, we don't seem to have come very far from the Anita Hill days. But as I said, for the Wall Street Journal to come out and talk to me about due process, or all the women out there that I'm hearing about who never came forward, it is really important not only for these survivors to be heard, but if their stories are credible, as Dr. Ford's story is, they need to be believed.
So 4 people said to be at the party Ford described have denied knowledge of the incident. Brett Kavanaugh, obviously, Mark Judge, who she says was in the room, P.J. Smith, and even Ford's longtime friend Leland Kaiser. So there hasn't been a law enforcement investigation, but there are these statements from the 4 people she remembers being there who don't remember the incident or don't even remember being at the party in question, according to her friend Leland Kaiser, who says she believes her, but doesn't have any memory of it. Doesn't Kavanaugh have the same presumption of innocence as anyone else in America?
I put his denial in the context of everything that I know about him in terms of how he approaches his cases. As I said, his credibility is already very questionable in my mind and in the minds of a lot of my fellow Judiciary Committee members, the Democrats. So he comes and, you know, when I say that he's very outcome-driven, he has an ideological agenda. It's very outcome-driven, and I can sit here and talk to you about some of the cases that exemplifies his, in my view, inability to be fair in the cases that come before him. This is a person that is going to be sitting on our Supreme Court making decisions that will impact women's reproductive choice. He very much is against women's reproductive choice. And I can tell you 2 very important cases in which he applied the same standard but came to totally different results to make it much harder for women to get this kind of coverage. So there are you know, so many indications of his own lack of credibility.
It sounds to me like you're saying because you don't trust him on policy and because you don't believe him when he says, for instance, that he does not have an opinion on Roe v. Wade, you don't believe him about this allegation about what happened at this party in 1982. Is that fair?
Well, this is why it is so important that there be at least an investigation so that there's some effort at collaboration. We think that there was a lot of drinking going on. As far as his friend Mark Judge, not even testifying, that is astounding to me. He was right there in that room. He refuses to testify.
Well, he says he doesn't remember an incident. I mean,
so that means there's a lot of drinking going on. This is the environment with this school, apparently. And meanwhile, Dr. Ford has come forward and said,
I think Kavanaugh's lying, though, is what you're saying.
Well, I believe her. Let's put it that way. There's credibility to her story, and I'm going to make sure that I and others, the Democrats at least, want to make sure that she is able to come forward. And there's nothing for her to gain by even coming forward with this.
I want to ask you a question because I've heard a lot of people saying the Democrats would be more credible about this issue if they were similarly outspoken when allegations like this are made about Democrats. And one example is the Democratic congressman and deputy chairman of the DNC, Keith Ellison, who's been accused of emotional and physical abuse by an ex-girlfriend named Karen Monahan. In a debate on Friday, Ellison was asked if he's confident there won't be any more allegations against him. Take a listen.
You know, I don't know what somebody might cook up, but I can tell you that there is absolutely nobody that I'm aware of who has any sort of, who's threatening or suggesting or has ever made a prior accusation.
He's running for Attorney General of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't the concern about Kavanaugh and Professor Ford be more credible if Democrats were also condemning similar charges against Democrats in their midst, including Congressman Ellison?
I've been very clear that I make no excuses for anybody who engages in this kind of behavior. And as far as Keith Ellison, these allegations need to be investigated and appropriate action taken. Meanwhile, we have, within the next week or so, we have before us a nominee that is under a cloud. There's not even a modicum of investigation. And so we are left with basically he said, she said. This happens a lot in the context of sexual assault. We know this. So, for example, when the person who's running against my sister, Heidi Heitkamp, when he says, oh, nothing happened, really? I don't think North Dakota should be electing somebody who does not think that attempted rape is a crime. But this is the context, this is the environment in which we are having this discussion. So I want to be very laser focused on the fact that this person who already has credibility issues. He will misstate the holding of a case, cases that I'm very familiar with. He will misapply the case. And I said at his hearing, I do not want to have a person on the Supreme Court who doesn't seem to be able to apply the facts in ways that do not meet his outcome-driven agenda. At the same time, we now have this cloud. Mm-hmm. You know, we already have one person on the Supreme Court who got there under this cloud. We should not have another.
I want to ask you, the last time you questioned Brett Kavanaugh, you asked whether he had ever committed sexual harassment or assault as a, quote, legal adult.
Yes.
I know you ask every Trump nominee this question. He replied no. This allegation took place when he was supposedly 17 years old. Mm-hmm. Why do you caveat the question with legal adult? Because that would have excluded, obviously, this incident, which he denies anyway.
Of course, 17-year-old is no child. It's not a baby. I asked that question because juvenile records are sealed.
Oh, it's as simple as that?
Pretty much. Yes, that is why.
Because it does seem to delineate behavior 18 and older and behavior under 18.
Generally, we hold adults responsible for their behavior, and it's that reason. But, you know, these are questions that have never been asked before of any nominee. At this point, I've probably asked this of about 100 nominees, and I asked this of both men and women, the same two questions. Because we need to change the kind of environment that says that women and men who suffer from this kind of trauma are not in a supportive environment where they can come forward. Because when you think about it, this is very underreported. Why? Because often the victims and the survivors, when they come forward, they're not believed, they're vilified. Mm-hmm. All of the things that are happening to Dr. Ford happens.
So we only have a little bit of time, but I just want to ask you, Sheldon Whitehouse told me, the senator from Rhode Island told me this week that if Democrats win back the Senate or the House, when you guys get gavels back, as he put it, there will be an investigation against Kavanaugh, even if he is a sitting Supreme Court justice. Does that set the stage for an attempted a potential impeachment of Kavanaugh?
Frankly, I have such concerns about this person getting to the Supreme Court. But on the other hand, I know that Maryland has eliminated the statute of limitations for kidnapping and for sexual assault of a minor. And I think that is still out there. And so there may be an investigation along those lines. So I think that this is a situation that is not going to go away. The court packing is going on big time with people from the Federalist Society, Anointed, and the Heritage Foundation, and they have spent decades and millions of dollars to lay the groundwork for people like Judge Kavanaugh and everybody else to get on the court with their very outcome-driven agenda that will not support women's right to choose, that basically, for Judge Kavanaugh in particular, very expansive views of protecting a sitting president from either criminal or civil proceedings. And I think this president in particular is aware of that because, you know what, his mission is self-preservation every second, minute, hour of the day.
Senator Mazie Hirono, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.